In a world full of commentators and thinkers, few people are as respected as our guest today.
We're joined by one of the world's most astute thinkers and most important intellectuals of our time.
Professor Noam Chomsky, who teaches linguistics and philosophy at MIT.
The New York Times described him as arguably the most important intellectual alive.
I have never had a guy requested more of me. In 12 years of doing 2 shows, I swear to God, every kid wants Noam Chomsky, and we got him today.
Noam Chomsky.
Noam Chomsky, one of the most prestigious
de esta América y del mundo.
American and world intellectuals.
Philosopher, social critic, political dissident Noam Chomsky.
Noam Chomsky.
Professor Noam Chomsky.
Noam Chomsky.
We're here at the Travis Building on MIT's campus, and we're going to go up to the 8th floor and see Noam Chomsky and have a quick review with him. Come on.
So what is in your opinion, probably the #1 issue being ignored by the mainstream media right now?
A lot of candidates, but
right.
One of them is that, well, it was actually suggested to me by a journal that I read from Bangladesh, which was talking about the fact that in the West, the crisis means the crisis of the banks. But for most of the people in the world, the most important thing in the world is not bailing out banks. In fact, the UN just estimated that the number of people facing severe hunger is just past 1 billion. And the World Food Program announced that it's got to cut back its contributions by 20 to 25% because the rich donor countries aren't meeting their meager obligations to promises to provide aid, which is, and the death toll from this is mind-boggling. So in Southern Africa alone, just children in Southern Africa, the death toll from hunger and easily treatable disease is beyond the level of Rwanda. It's Rwanda killing every day, not for 100 days, but always. That's a pretty severe crisis. And I happened to bring this up last week at a meeting. There was a meeting at the UN General Assembly on what's called the responsibility to protect. We have to protect people in trouble. So I brought this up as a good example of where you could meet your responsibility to protect. You claim you're upset about Rwanda. How about the fact that it's Rwanda-style killing every day, just children, just Southern Africa, multiplied all over the world? Almost no reaction, including the South. Well, that's one example.
Right.
But it's illustrative of a lot more, of course.
Right in our backyard, the professor, Henry Louis Gates, was arrested. What does that tell us about our media, the fact that it's really captured the headlines currently and that the president has decided to jump in?
Like the Bangladesh newspaper, yeah, you're right. That was a front page story, headlines every day. But there are other things related, and I suspect he would agree, that are a lot more important. So, for example, I just read a couple of weeks ago one of the most horrifying books I've ever read by Douglas Blackman, called, I think, Slavery by Another Name. It's the first detailed discussion. I sort of knew the general story, but the first really detailed discussion of what happened after Reconstruction. So, there was a little period after the Civil War when blacks were allowed to vote, to got representation. Things seemed to be looking up a little bit, but then Reconstruction ended, 1877. And then in the South, but with the cooperation of the North, so it's joint, they reinstituted a system which was much worse than slavery. It was basically incarceration of the black population under a system of laws which essentially criminalized black life, like vagrancy, or talking too loud, or looking at a white woman, or whatever it may be. So you pick people up, toss them in prison, they stay there for life, and that's what created the Industrial Revolution. A big steel, so on and so forth, mines, hideous conditions, much worse than slavery, for good reasons. I mean, slave owners, their slaves were capital, they had to sort of take care of them. But here, it's nothing. You just rent them from the prisons. And the descriptions are horrifying. It went right up to the Second World War. After the Second World War, during and after the Second World War, there was a brief change. There was an expanding economy. There was a need for labor, skilled labor. So there was a kind of an opening for African American men. They could go into the auto industry, maybe get a decent home or something like that. The book doesn't go into this, but if you think about it, that period ended in the 1970s when the country moved towards a kind of financialization, deindustrialization, financialization. There's nothing left for what amounted to poor immigrants. Like, when my father was an immigrant in the early part of the 20th century, there was an expanding economy. He could work in a sweatshop and end up with his kid going to college and so on. So that's now closed, and what's happening instead is that the blacks are being thrown into jail again. The incarceration rate, as I'm sure you know, has gone up from around 1980, just skyrocketed way beyond any other country, and having nothing to do with crime, crime rates. So if you look at the whole history, there's slavery, there's post-Reconstruction, worse than slavery, goes up to the Second World War, a little window, which was not beautiful, but at least it was something, and then back into slavery and prison labor and so on. Mm-hmm. That's the history of blacks in America for centuries. And so it is, it's unfortunate that the Harvard professor got arrested, but to just compare the two cases, how much is there about this? And so this book was by a Wall Street Journal reporter, but it's not. But the whole picture and what it means is gone, and the picture is now different. It's the beer party today. There's a black president. It's all over. We've gotten to a post-racial society. Have we? I mean, take a look at the history of the present situation. Right. At the closing down of the auto industries, which is what's happening, it's essentially driving back the closing the brief window. It's one piece of what's closing the brief window for most of the black population. I mean, there's an opening for Condoleezza Rice, and Barack Obama, and black middle class, but there always was. The most exciting part of the world right now is Latin America, especially South America, or Latin America altogether. There was, for the first time in 500 years, since the Spanish and Portuguese conquests, the majority of the population has actually is becoming organized, is entering the political arena, is taking over land, sometimes what's called illegally. In Bolivia, which is the most exciting place, I think, the indigenous population, which is the most repressed in the hemisphere, were able to become organized and active enough so that they took over the government. They had a democratic election of a kind that we can't even dream of. I mean, our elections are basically bought. A good indication of the way our elections work is take a look sometime at the statistics on popularity of Congress and percentage of incumbents who get reelected. Popularity, like it can be in the teens, but like maybe 98% get reelected. Well, that's just one indication of the fact that the political system it's a joke. People can only vote for candidates they dislike or hate, maybe, and elections are basically bought. I think if people look closely, the main reason why Obama defeated McCain barely is that the financial industries preferred him. So they poured a lot more money into his campaign than into McCain's campaign. And you can see it in policies. The policies are almost being dictated by Wall Street. It's close to that. So that's our elections. On the other hand, in Bolivia's elections, the poor majority, very poor repressed majority, elected their own candidate, a candidate from their own ranks, poor peasant. And furthermore, they didn't just show up on election day and go home. The election was just one day and continuing ongoing struggles, which have won a lot of impressive victories, like kicking huge multinational out of the country when under World Bank orders it was privatizing water, meaning getting it out of the range of much of the population. Well, the issues are crucial. Control of resources, multiculturalism is a huge issue there. A lot of cultural variety, the issue of justice, and so on. And furthermore, the people know the issues. It's not like here, when issues are kept out of campaigns, and for good reasons, because most people disagree with the parties on issues, so keep them out of the campaigns. The issues, elections are run by the public relations industry. I mean, as you may know, the advertising industry was so impressed by the 2008 election that they gave Obama the award for best marketing campaign of the year. That sort of captures it. And the issues are kept in the background. It's all pleasant rhetoric, change, hope, whatever that means. But there are issues. The issues come from the public, not from the leader, not from the party managers, not from the advertising industry. And people are struggling about the issues all the time. Well, that's exciting, especially in the poorest country in South America. And it's part of more general changes that are going on in various ways and so on. It's not perfection by any means, but a lot of good things are happening. And here's another story that isn't covered. Well, there isn't. Of course, the traditional elites in Bolivia, the people who owned and ran the country, mostly white, Europeanized elites, naturally they don't like it. So they've been starting a kind of a secessionist movement. They don't quite call it that, to try to pull away. And they have most of the hydrocarbons, so they could be rich. And last September, I guess it was, it led to bloodshed and killed a couple dozen poor peasants and so on. And there was a meeting of all the South American countries, even including Colombia, the U.S. ally. All the South American countries met. There's a new organization, Union of South American Republics, so they had maybe their first meeting in Chile, and to consider the secessionist tendencies of the bloodshed. And they issued a strong statement supporting Evo Morales, the president, and in response he welcomed the statement and made an important statement. He said, this is the first time in 500 years that South America is taking its fate into its own hands without the domination of external powers. Recently that means the United States. That's pretty important. So important that it never got a word in the United States. I had a friend do a media check, couldn't find a word. And this is a really important development. This is Washington's position on this for decades has been, if we can't control Latin America, how are we going to control the world? So this is real important, exciting developments. We're seeing plenty of backlash. We're seeing it in Honduras right now, in fact. But it's moving along, and it's exciting and significant, I think. And there are other things, but this is, in many ways, I think this is the most exciting. And in fact, the comparison of Bolivia and the United States is particularly dramatic. On the one hand, the richest, most powerful country in history. On the other hand, the poorest country in South America. And they can run democratic elections, and we can't. I mean, that ought to be a front page story in itself. That tells you a lot.